I wasn't protecting my peace, I was actually avoiding the work. This is me dragging myself right now. Hello, my loves, and welcome back to Vibe Check. Today, we're getting into something that might step on some toes. It might ruffle a few feathers, but I promise it's going to be in the most loving way. I really want to talk about something that's been sitting heavily on my spirit lately. This idea of protecting our energy and how sometimes it can actually be the very thing that keeps us stuck. Now, I know some of you are probably like, girl, didn't you just do a whole video on how protecting your energy in 2025 is important? Like, which one is it? And I hear you. And listen, yes, both are true. This is also the beauty of wellness, right? It's nuanced and it's never one size fits all. And we don't arrive at one answer and just stop there. We layer our understanding and we integrate and we adjust and we expand and contract as needed, like breath. So let's talk about it. When is protecting your energy truly serving you? And when is it just another way of avoiding the very connections and experiences that can help you grow? I want to be very clear. There are absolutely times when protecting your energy isn't just important, but it's necessary. There are some spaces and some people and situations that are unsafe, and distancing yourself is the healthiest thing that you can do. And so if that's where you are right now at this point in your life, trust that. Please. This conversation is not about ignoring the real need for protection. This conversation is about recognizing the difference between avoiding people or situations out of fear and discomfort or past wounds, and removing yourself from harm, removing yourself from toxicity, or removing yourself from genuinely unsafe dynamics. Okay? I just want to make sure that that is 1000% clear. The first keeps you in a cycle of self-isolation and it limits your growth, while the second is an act of self-preservation and self-love. So again, there are spaces and relationships and environments that are simply not good for us. Places where our voices aren't valued and our boundaries are disregarded and we're made to feel small. So I'm not talking about staying in those spaces. Leaving those spaces, that's not avoidance. That, my love, is wisdom. That is knowing your worth. But on the flip side, if we start filtering out every single experience that makes us uncomfortable, and if we label every single imperfection as a red flag, then we might miss out on the relationships and the experiences that are meant to stretch us and challenge us and to help us grow. So as we move through this conversation, I really want to invite you to hold both truths. Protection is necessary, but so is discernment. And the work is in learning the difference. Okay, now that that's clear, I do want to acknowledge the fact that the instincts to protect ourselves is completely natural, especially if life has taught you that being open leads to pain or disappointment or betrayal. And if you've ever been harmed, if you've ever been manipulated, if you've ever been let down by the people who are supposed to care for you, then it makes so much sense why your nervous system would be on high alert, scanning for any sign that something or that someone might not be safe, because my nervous system does this all the time as a trauma survivor. And like I said, there's wisdom in that. We need discernment. We need to recognize red flags. We need to have boundaries. We need to honor our intuition when something doesn't feel right. Energy protection is vital, but it isn't meant to be this rigid, impenetrable force field. It's meant to be a fluid and dynamic response to the moment. And as someone who had to be frequently reminded of this in therapy a few years ago, imperfection is not the same thing as a red flag, okay? And what I have learned through my own experience is that when we get too caught up in trying to protect ourselves from literally every potential misstep, we can really end up in this self imposed isolation. And then we'll mistake it for self preservation. And maybe you've also been there before. Maybe you start filtering out people at the first sign of discomfort or at the first sign of something that feels familiar and maybe not in the best way. Like, nah, I'm good. Like, I'm not dealing with that. Been there, done that, got a t-shirt. And you tell yourself this before you even give yourself a chance to see where that relationship could go. Maybe you avoid situations that might challenge you, thinking that you're protecting your peace when really you're just staying in the comfort zone of what feels predictable. And I'm not here saying that you're wrong for doing that because I think we all do this. But I also think the hardest part about this is that when we do this, we don't actually give ourselves the space and the chance to rewire those old patterns. We don't get the opportunity to replace painful experiences with better ones because we just keep confirming the same old story. Like the story that people can't be trusted and I have to do this alone and it's safer to keep my distance. But is that true? Or is it just the past wound speaking? A lot of the times in my case, it's the past wound speaking. And I think we also have to ask ourselves, what might happen if instead of closing ourselves off entirely, we learned to navigate the discomfort of connection with more nuance? What if we trusted ourselves to discern not from fear, but from a place of inner knowing, from a place of wisdom? There was a time in my life where I was so quick to cut people off. And this is really my Queen of Swords, Aquarius energy speaking. I'm an Aquarius sun. And back in the day, it took very little for me to give you the snippety snip, you are the weakest link, goodbye. Like, it really didn't take much. Like literally the second I felt discomfort, I would retreat into myself and I would tell myself that I was protecting my peace. But when I really sat with it, I realized that a lot of the time I wasn't protecting my peace. I was actually avoiding the work. This is me dragging myself right now. I was avoiding the work. I was avoiding the tough conversations, the potential of misunderstandings, the vulnerability that comes with staying and navigating complexity instead of leaving at the first sign of friction. And I had to ask myself, is it that I'm removing myself from harm, or am I just afraid of being seen in all my layers? The messy, the imperfect, the version of me that's still learning. So, community has kind of been like a hot topic collectively, but also for me in this moment, even right here on this channel. And community has also been everything for me in rewriting those beliefs about connection and trust and intimacy that are outdated. And when I say intimacy, I want to stress that I don't just mean romance. I mean that deep, soul nourishing connection that just makes you feel seen, that lets you exhale, that reminds you that you don't have to do this life thing by yourself. I used to think of relationships in a very transactional way, and that's because that's what was modeled to me. I had a couple of romantic relationships in my 20s that were very toxic, and I often felt like I owed those partners just for being in my life, which didn't feel good. It felt like if they did something nice, then there was like this unspoken debt attached. And honestly, when I reflect on these relationships, I can also pinpoint that that's a pattern I also saw from my father. Anytime he did something for me, it came with an expectation. And if I didn't respond in the way that he wanted, even if I was saying thank you, if I wasn't grateful enough in his eyes, then it was a problem. So I internalized this idea that accepting help or love or care from people meant that I was like indebted to them in some way, that if I let people close, then I would have to pay for it later. And I wonder if any of you have felt this too. that constant need to prove you deserve the kindness you receive or to make sure you're giving just as much, like that's a big thing for me, which I feel like that can easily go into dangerous territory when we are interacting with folks who go above and beyond and maybe in ways that might not be so healthy for them. Like maybe they don't yet have a fully developed relationship with boundaries. And then because they show up for you in this like superhuman way, you feel like you have to match that energy. And then you end up just like running yourself dry. No bueno. But yeah, you feel this need to make sure you're giving just as much, if not more, so no one can say that you owe them. And I have been working hard on rewriting that script, on allowing myself to receive without fear, reminding myself that real reciprocal relationships aren't built on keeping score. I remember in the early days of my last relationship, my first instinct was to run. I had never dated someone who leaned more polyamorous, and it terrified me. It really pushed me out of my comfort zone. And part of me, not even part of me, all of me wanted to just write it off immediately because what? No, I ain't trying to share with nobody. Like, I'm sure many of you have been in that position as well. And my position on monogamy and polyamory has shifted so much since then. I was trying to convince myself that this just isn't for me, without even giving myself a chance to experience it. But something in me knew that the discomfort wasn't a warning sign. It was more of an invitation. It wasn't necessarily an invitation to compromise my own values, but it was an opportunity to learn more about myself, about my desires, and about my capacity for connection. And as I'm saying this, I gotta tell you, this book shifted so much for me. Even if you are not trying to explore polyamory, non-monogamy, this book really has some really great information on just like attachment styles and trauma and like how that plays a role in the ways that we relate to one another in relationships. This has even been helpful in my monogamous relationships. But anyway, not to get too off topic, I am so glad that I stayed because even though we ultimately weren't compatible in the long term for more reasons than just that relationship truly expanded me in ways that I never expected. And I never would have experienced that if I had run away. That relationship taught me what healthy reciprocity looks like. It taught me how to communicate my needs without fear of abandonment. And most importantly, it taught me how to be vulnerable without feeling like I owed something in return. Although that person and I are no longer together today, and we really only speak like once in a blue moon now, there truly is a deep love there that I think will always exist. And so for that, I'm grateful. I'm grateful to have chosen family that I would not have had I just shut the door and gone the other direction. Because the truth is, we need people, especially in the times that we're in, especially when the world feels as heavy and uncertain as it does. Community is not nice to have. Community truly is medicine, and it's what keeps us going when everything feels impossible. And it's what reminds us that we've faced hardship before and we made it through together. I have to name this too, because as a Black woman, and as a queer Black woman at that, this whole conversation about vulnerability and openness just hits different. Because as Black women, I feel like we are conditioned from birth to be on guard, to know that the world won't always keep us safe, that we have to advocate for ourselves in the doctor's office and in our workplaces, like in the very spaces where we should be protected but aren't. And so we armor up and we learn to move through life hyper aware and hyper independent and hyper discerning because we've had to. But when does that become a cage? Like, when does it become a barrier? When does the self-protection start keeping love out too? For me, living in South Florida, where queer Black community is not as abundant as it was when I lived in Brooklyn, New York. I have felt this so deeply. I have felt myself putting up these extra walls, not because I don't want connection, I crave connection, but because I don't always know who's safe to be my full self around. And that's real. We have to be discerning, but we also have to ask when it makes sense, when it's safe to. Where's the balance? Where can we allow more than we fear? How do we cultivate spaces where we can learn to let our guard down, even just a little bit, if it means being able to be nourished by community? As a Black woman, I feel like on a subconscious level, just from observing how my own mother moves throughout the world when I was growing up, I was raised to believe that protection meant toughness. And beyond that, I think just by picking up on social cues, because I was always a very perceptive child, I felt that the world wasn't going to keep me safe. And so I had to do it myself. And for a while, I really carried that into every space. Yeah, like my relationships, my friendships, even my work. And I remember a time in my early 20s when someone actually called me out on it. Like they told me straight up how others felt that I was cold and I was standoffish and as if like I never let anybody in. And it hit me because they were right. I had been so focused on protecting myself that I hadn't realized that I was also blocking connection. And that moment really changed something in me. It made me start questioning, like, where have I mistaken my walls for wisdom? You know, like, where am I so busy shielding myself that I've forgotten to let myself be held? Because I deserve to be held. So here's where I land. Instead of thinking about energy protection as a wall, I am learning to think of it as a door because doors can be closed when needed. Doors can also be locked. Doors can also be left cracked open a little bit, you know? And instead of slamming them shut at the first sign of discomfort, I am learning to ask myself, is this discomfort actually a warning? Or is this just something new? Is this just something unfamiliar? I am learning to let people in slowly rather than not at all. And I'm learning to recognize that trust is something built over time and that it doesn't have to be like this all or nothing thing. And if any of this is resonating with you, I just want to invite you to do some of the same reflection and ask yourself, where in your life might you be mistaking avoidance for protection? Where might you be keeping yourself from the very connections that could help you grow? And how can you create boundaries that allow for both discernment and deep, meaningful connections, deep, meaningful relationships? Because you can be discerning and still have those things. You don't have to close them out. And beyond that, my love, you deserve connection. You deserve support. Like you deserve to experience life fully, not just survive it. There's actually a little part of Communion by Bell Hooks that I would like to read. I believe it's the opening of chapter 7. And chapter 7 is called Choosing and Learning to Love. And it says, before I reached the age of 40, I never even considered that my relationships did not last because I did not know enough about love. After all, I had lived with a male partner for 15 years, and that seems like a long time. When I left this relationship, I thought our failure to sustain meaningful intimacy was due to lacks in my partner and not in myself. Despite relentless scrutiny in a constructive manner of the problems we had encountered and failed to resolve, it never occurred to me to interrogate myself about whether I had been loving. I assumed that love was a given. Therein lay my mistake. My knowledge of love was not deep. All the philosophical ways of thinking about love in my life had come from books. Translating theory into practice was much harder than simply reading about it. And like most women, I just assumed I was more loving than the man in my life. After several years of living alone, I began to think seriously about my relationship to intimacy. Until then, I, like many women in similar circumstances, felt that the problems in my relationships were caused by my male partner's fear of intimacy. While I haven't had many partners, it was not hard to see similar threads running through the pattern of my relational choices. I chose men who were quiet, reserved, private, or who were loners, often withholding and emotionally unavailable. They were all the adult children of alcoholics. They had all been raised by single mothers to whom they were very attached. In each case, a quality I liked most in these relationships was the man's willingness to accept my autonomy. When I left my longest relationship, I would often joke that we had been better at giving each other space to be separate selves than we had been at creating and sustaining the spaces of togetherness. Being alone and celibate gave me the psychic space to confront myself and examine my relationship to intimacy. Soon it was obvious that I had chosen partners who were not particularly into intimacy, because then I had never had to make a leap of faith, to trust, or to risk. Being with men who were not interested in offering abiding closeness meant that I never really had to be close. Yet, I could have an image of myself as this open, giving woman who really desired closeness, at times feeling smug because I worked so hard on the relationship. Working to be close with someone who was not interested in sustained closeness not only depresses the spirit, it makes you a perfect target for aggression. The reason why I wanted to read that segment is because I feel like a lot of what she's talking about there has to do with self-protection. She, on some subconscious level, was intentionally choosing these men who didn't necessarily desire closeness so that she herself did not have to practice intimacy. And I'm not sure exactly what called me to open up that book because I haven't opened it in years. But I was guided toward that chapter, and I just figured that I would read it today in case it could resonate with somebody and in case it could give you a further nudge or further validation as to why it's important to do that self-inquiry so that we can open ourselves up to the sorts of intimacy and closeness that we want. We can practice discernment, but we can also go within and look at the parts of us that make us feel like we have to protect our energy in the first place. I am feeling called to close this by saying that if you've been hurt and if openness feels scary, then that is okay. And I want to invite you to start small and to start where it feels safe and to trust yourself and to trust that you can build connection in a way that honors your healing. And I know it's not an easy journey, but it is worth it. And I really do want that sort of healing for you. I want that sort of healing for all of us. If you're not already, feel free to subscribe so you can join this community and stay tapped into these sorts of conversations. And as always, I am so grateful for you. Thank you so much for sharing this space with me. Take care of yourself, and until next time, I'll see you in the next one. Bye, y'all.